To me, assessment is a really interesting topic because you've got so many things to juggle. You've got to look at how the person is qualified for a job, what are their skills, and then you have the whole personal element of, what are their behaviors going to be. And it's really, really challenging, difficult thing to do. And I love challenges. So to me, being able to see clearly into a person's potential job success is my greatest endeavor. I really want to see how they can do it, and if they'll do it, and how well we can predict it. So that's been the focus of our company for the last 20 years, of trying to more and more be able to predict whether somebody's going to succeed in a job or not. We've had approximately 2 million users, 14 languages, 20 years of research in 25 different countries, and now we're using 200 plus job success formulas, which I'll get into and explain what that is. My background is, have some background in mathematics, in counseling psychology, human potential psychology, and organizational psychology. And basically, my premise is that understanding people is really difficult, because about 90% of how people behave is driven by unconscious behaviors. So if you're just looking at the surface behavior of personality, it's very, very difficult to understand what they're going to do when they're actually on the job. And behavior, as we'll see, is about half of what drives a person's job success. So my background in counseling psychology, human potential psychology, is the basis of the development of the suitability side of our assessment. And the mathematical side helps a bit too, because what we're really doing is trying to calculate whether they're going to succeed or not. We want to come up with a score that tells the person how likely this person is to succeed, not just a bunch of divergent information that the person has to then try to figure out what does all that mean, because that doesn't help very much. You can see we're pretty much all around the world, a lot of different countries. We've got agents and distributors in many, many locations. Got a whole variety of different companies involved that we support and work with our instrument. So my question for you today is, what if you could place a job advert and then automatically receive a short list of applicants? Ranked in order according to how well they fit your requirements. Down to detail. It's a pretty good proposition, right? So what we're going to do today is look at how that can be done. What if you could save about 80% of your administration time while at the same time ensuring you find the best candidate? That's a pretty good proposition. Okay, so we're going to look and see how that can be done today. How about, what if you could accurately predict behavior in order to hire and develop performance? Pretty useful if that could happen. What if you could easily benchmark jobs to create a complete assessment system for hiring and developing employees? What if you could easily give your managers a clear guideline for building and maintaining an effective working relationship with each employee based on that employee's employment needs? Pretty useful. What I found in this business is many people are looking for a magic bullet. They want to be able to say, just give me something that will tell me whether the person's going to succeed or not. There's a big problem in that, though. Nobody can give it to you. You've got to participate in the process. There is a magic bullet, and the magic bullet is you being able to look at your job in detail, analyze your job in detail, and create a formula for success out of that job. Now you've got a potential for a magic bullet. If you want somebody to hand you a product or hand you some special resume searching tool that's going to hand you the best candidate, give it up. It's not going to happen. It can only do what you tell it to do. Computers are not smart. You know, they'll only take what you can give them and then give you back out of that. So you've got to be able to, in great detail, define what you want to do and cover all the bases. And if you don't cover all the bases, there will be no magic bullet ever. So the aim in assessment is to cover all the bases, to think through the details. Then you've got a potential for a magic bullet. Okay. So what's the purpose of recruitment when we look at doing recruitment? Is it to fill your vacancies? You just want to fill the space? That isn't going to work. So is it to hire good candidates? Well, that's close, getting closer. But really, when you do recruitment, you've got to win your business competition, don't you? You've got to hire the best people available. It's not just a matter of getting good ones. It's a matter of getting the best ones. If you don't get the best ones, guess who else is going to get it? The competition. So at the recruitment level, you're deep into competition, right there. So if you're not getting the best ones, you've got a good chance that you're starting to lose the competition. So firstly, you need to source as many good candidates as practical. Then you need to accurately assess which candidates have the greatest overall capability and suitability for your company. Then you need to convince the best candidate to work for you, because guess what? The best candidates probably have some other offers out there. So how are you going to get them to come work for you? That's often an emotional decision as well. And you need to look at what are the things that's going to drive that person to come work for you as opposed to someone else. Then the next step is to create a plan that will build their success and work satisfaction in your company. With that entire process, you've got a really good shot at talent management. So today we're going to look at how do we hire the best candidates. Then how do we predicting and developing success behaviors. And then we'll take a look at what we're calling the job success formula. I study a lot of research related to job success and interviews and what things predict job success. And previously, maybe 20 years ago, most people used what we'd call unstructured interview. Possibly used a little bit of personality assessment, but an unstructured interview. It means you get the person in, you talk to them about the job. It's not highly structured in terms of what you're going to ask them, and not a lot of thought about what the job is involved. Okay? Presently, most people would use a structured interview and have some thought about the job, what are the requirements of the job, and during the interview they'd be discussing those things in some detail. Maybe use a personality assessment or other targeted assessments. But most of the time, these are sort of divergent information. We've got this piece here, now we've got our interview here, and then we look at their qualifications over here. Maybe we'll give them an IQ test or some kind of cognitive test, and then we'll leave it to the poor interviewer to figure out what to do with all these things. Usually that's how it goes. Okay. People have asked me, well, where do you see the industry going? Where do you see the recruitment industry going in the future? My answer is basically tools that obtain complete job analysis with automated generation of assessment. So you do a job analysis, and from that job analysis, it generates an assessment. Secondly, a customized assessment based on all qualifications and suitability, producing a total score. Okay? So not just qualifications, but also behavioral, and completely customized. Online automated pre-assessment. Integrated assessment with applicant tracking. Applicant tracking is nice, but it doesn't accomplish the primary goal of recruitment. What I propose is applicant assessment systems. That means that you're assessing during the process of recruiting, because that's the primary function. There's two basic parts, or two basic things that you need to know when you're doing recruitment, or even development of employees. The first part is eligibility. We look at their education, their specific experience, and their what we would call hard skills. That tells us whether the person can do the job. The second part is what we call suitability. Their attitudes, their motivation, their interpersonal skills, their work preferences, their interests, and their values. And you notice I didn't just say personality. Personality is about half of that. So if you're measuring personality, you're really measuring about 50% of the suitability or 25% of the overall. The suitability part says, will the person do the job? So not just do they have the ability, are they going to sustain it? Are they going to keep at it? Will they keep driving it? Will they fit our company? And that's usually about half of what you need to know. That's the most difficult thing to do, is to figure that part out. Usually we hire people for their skills and then we fire them for their lack of suitability. It's very challenging. You know, you've got 60 minutes in an interview to sit down with someone and determine not just their personality. That's not good enough. You've got to determine all the traits of that person, how well they're going to fit the job. That's a really hard thing to do. And on top of that, they're determined to hide anything that they think you don't want to tell you. And then you've got to figure out what parts of them is the truth and what parts are not the truth. This is a really challenging thing to do. So the unstructured interview, basically there's been a lot of research on, and what they've shown is that the correlation with performance is about 0.1. That means you're almost flipping the coin. You've got very little ability to predict whether someone succeeds or not. Okay? There's a mountain of research on this. And then they came along and they said, well, let's look at the difference between that and structured interviews. And that's where you've got some pre-designed questions based on job requirements. The interviewer takes notes and sort of guesstimates the overall quality of the person. And maybe you use some other tests, of personality. And then that takes about 1 to 3 hours to prepare for this process. But what does it do? It increases your correlation up to 0.2. That's a lot better than twice as good, by the way. It's really, you've jumped ahead from 0.1 to 0.2 correlation. Means that you're actually getting something worthwhile. 0.1, you're not getting much worthwhile. It's almost not worth doing, frankly. 0.2, you're getting something that's worth looking at anyway. But there's a big problem with this. 0.2 stinks. 0.2, also, if you look at it with the naked eye and you say you've got a lineup of how people perform and then a lineup of scores of how you predicted they'd perform, you probably wouldn't be able to see it with the naked eye. You would need some kind of statistical analysis to see it. So it's really not very good. So that's my challenge, to say, how do we get better than that? And the first thing you have to ask yourself is, how did you get from 0.1 to 0.2? That's the key to how you get better than that. Okay? You got to 0.1 to 0.2 because you thought about the job. You gave a little bit of analysis of the job. You wrote down some basic questions that you want to ask people. Okay. So the premise here is that if you really think deeply about the job, and you really lay out a whole formula related to what's necessary for success in that job, that you're going to get higher than 0.2, and I guarantee you will. So we'll move on to a different perspective, which is applicant assessment system, using a job success formula. In this case, you're doing something really different. First of all, you've got a pre-designed question for every relevant factor. So you've thought through every relevant factor and you create a pre-designed question for it. In addition to that, you create pre-designed options or answer options for each question. So you look at what are the possible things how people could answer it, and how do you want to score it. Okay? Each factor is weighted and scored for different levels. So It may be that this factor is important, more important than another factor, so we'll give it a stronger weighting. And this factor, well, is maybe just a nice to have, and we'll give it a bonus or something. So you think through each factor and how it's going to impact success, because you already have knowledge of your job. You already have experience of years of trying to hire people in your situation. That's what you need to bring forward in order to get a good assessment. No one can hand that to you. That knowledge is in your head. Yeah? Okay. Next, a complete set of suitability and eligibility factors are assessed. So we're not just looking at one side, eligibility or suitability, we're looking at both sides. One of the things that's always driven me crazy is a lot of our customers, when we first started doing this, and I keep trying to tell them, don't do that, but they'll first assess qualifications of the people. And they'll take people who are qualified, and then they'll put them in a pile and say, now I'm going to do a suitability assessment. I'll use the Harrison and do our suitability assessment. And then they'll do that suitability assessment, and then they'll say, well, let's pick the person with the highest suitability assessment, because that must be the right person, right? But it's wrong, you know? Because half of the factors are eligibility factors. The other half are suitability. So the person could have a higher eligibility, which will then, when you add them together, you end up with a different score, right? So you want to look at the combination of eligibility and suitability, not just looking at them serially. If you do an accurate pre-assessment, which is a really nice thing, you can pre-assess people, and if you ask the right questions, you don't have to go through resumes. Okay? You can actually end up with a score that tells you how well they fit your requirements. You know, the problem with resumes is they don't tell you what you want to know. You know? That you have very specific things you need to know when you hire people, and the resume doesn't tell you that. They wrote the resume because they want to make themselves look as good as possible, right? And they want to say their experience, but it's not targeted. It's not targeted to each thing that you need to know for your job. So no matter how you cut it, no matter how good your resume searcher is, it can't take information that's not there. It can't give you something that doesn't exist. It can only give you what's there. And it's going to then come out in bits and pieces, and okay, it may help a little bit, but it's not an assessment. Interviews are pre-designed, systematic, and consistent. So once you have a job success formula, that formula can and should drive the interview as well. Because then you've got a clear idea of what each factor is, it's weighted how important it is, it's determined how it's going to score, and your interviewer just follows that process and scores it in that way. Okay? Or rescores it. Is another way of looking at it. All right. The formula is completely reusable. It takes about 2 to 6 hours to develop such a formula, but from then on after, you now have a formula with a click of the button, you can assess anybody for that job. That's the great value to it. If you don't have a formula, a detailed formula, what you have to do is each person you look at and each person you interview, you have to try and recreate that formula in your head as you're talking to them and interviewing them. It's virtually an impossible task to do. If I give you even 5 factors and I say there's 5 factors and each of them are weighted differently, and you've got 10 candidates and they all have different scores on each of those 5 factors, how well do you think you can juggle that in your head? It's virtually impossible, unless you're Rain Man. Okay? Then you may be able to do it. But it's what we ask interviewers to do is almost ridiculous, because we don't give them a formula. So therefore, what are they going to do? Obviously, they're going to pick the person they like the best, right? And that gets you about a 0.1 correlation with success. So essentially, that's what you see when people get the 0.1. The unstructured interview comes right down to how well do I like this person. Okay? So that clearly doesn't work. So in assessment, you want to keep moving away from allowing the interviewer to pick the person they like the best, because that gets you pretty random results. Okay? So the more you structure it, the more you process it, the more you're able to then have the selection be based on the actual job requirements and the formula that makes job success. And there's this tendency for people to just keep going back to pick the person they like the best. I've been in a room full of executives, choosing the person that's going to run the company or whatever, and they all have a different idea about which person to pick. Why? Because they have a different set of criteria in their head. Each one's got a different idea about what we need. And you know what? Each one likes a different person than the other one. Right? And what that tells us is we're missing something here. We need to come down to discover what exactly is the requirements. That's the first thing that needs to happen. The great thing about doing that is that you start to develop agreement in the group. So everyone says, yeah, okay, that makes sense. This should be weighted this, and that's this important, and that's this important. Otherwise, the interviewer, whoever it is going to make it up in their own head, moving straight back toward 0.1 correlation, which is very close to a guess. Okay. The processing time, if you have a formula, is also greatly reduced. And you start to get correlations that are very, very high, like 0.5 or more correlations. That's a lot better than 0.2.